Chapter 20 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 20. End of the State of Indecision. Long before I had any thought of writing this story, I had told it so often to my little maid that she now knows some of it better than I. If you saw me looking up from my paper to ask her, what was it that Birse said to Jean about the minister's flowers, or where was Hendry Munn hidden on the night of the riots, and heard her confident answers, you would conclude that she had been in the thick of these events, instead of born many years after them. I mention this now because I have reached a point where her memory contradicts mine. She maintains that Rob Dow was told of the meeting in the wood by the two boys whom it disturbed, while my own impression is that he was a witness of it. If she is right, Rob must have succeeded in frightening the boys into telling no other person, for certainly the scandal did not spread in Thrums. After all, however, it is only important to know that Rob did learn of the meeting. Its first effect was to send him sullenly to the drink. Many a time since these events have I pictured what might have been their upshot had Dow confided their discovery to me. Had I suspected why Rob was grown so dour again, Gavin's future might have been very different. I was meeting Rob now and again in the glen, asking, with an affected carelessness he did not bottom, for the news of the little minister. But what he told me was only the gossip of the town, and what I should have known, that Thrums might never know it, he kept to himself. I suppose he feared to speak to Gavin, who made several efforts to reclaim him, but without avail. Yet Rob's heart opened for a moment to one man, or rather was forced open by that man. A few days after the meeting at the well, Rob was bringing the smell of whiskey with him down Banker's Close, when he ran against a famous staff, with which the doctor pinned him to the wall. "Ay," said the outspoken doctor, looking contemptuously into Rob's bleary eyes, "so this is what your conversion amounts to. Faugh! Rob Dow, if you were half a man, the very thought of what Mr. Dishart has done for you would make you run past the public houses." "It's the thocht of him that sends me running to them," growled Rob, knocking down the staff. "Let me alane." "What do you mean by that?" demanded McQueen, hooking him this time. "Spirit himself. Spirit a woman." "What woman?" "Take your staff out of my neck." "Not till you tell me why you, of all people, are speaking against the minister." Torn by a desire for a confidant and loyalty to Gavin, Rob was already in a fury. "Say again," he burst forth, "that I was speaking against the minister, and I'll practise on you what I'm awid to do to her." "Who is she?" "Was wha? The woman who the minister—" "I said nothing about a woman," said poor Rob, alarmed for Gavin. "Doctor, I'm ready to swear afore a bailie that I never saw them together at the Kaims." "The Kaims!" exclaimed the doctor, suddenly enlightened. "Pooh! You only mean the Egyptian. Rob, make your mind easy about this. I know why he met her there." "Do you ken that she has bewitched him? Do you ken I saw him trying to put his arms around her? Do you ken they have a trysting place in Caddam Wood?" This came from Rob in a rush, and he would fain have called it all back. "I'm drunk, doctor, roaring drunk," he said hastily, "and it wasna the minister I saw, it was another man." Nothing more could the doctor draw from Rob, but he had heard sufficient to smoke some pipes on. Like many who pride themselves on being recluses, McQueen loved the gossip that came to him uninvited. Indeed, he opened his mouth to it as greedily as any man in Thrums. He respected Gavin, however, too much to find this new dish palatable, and so his researches to discover whether other Auld Lichts shared Rob's fears were conducted with caution. "Is there no word of your minister's getting a wife yet?" he asked several, but only got for answers, "There's word of a Glasgow lady sending him baskets of flowers," or "He has his een open, but he's taking his time. Ay, he's looking for the blade of corn in the stack of chaff." This convinced McQueen that the congregation knew nothing of the Egyptian, but it did not satisfy him, and he made an opportunity of inviting Gavin into the surgery. It was to the doctor the cosiest nook in his house, but to me and many others a room that smelled of hearses. On the top of the pipes and tobacco tins that littered the table there usually lay a death certificate, placed there deliberately by the doctor to scare his sister, who had a passion for putting the surgery to rights. "By the way," McQueen said, after he and Gavin had talked a little while. "Did I ever advise you to smoke?" "It is your usual form of salutation," Gavin answered, laughing, "but I don't think you ever supplied me with a reason." "I dare say not. I am too experienced a doctor to cheapen my prescriptions in that way. However, here is one good reason. I have noticed, sir, that at your age a man is either a slave to a pipe or to a woman. Do you want me to lend you a pipe now?" "Then I am to understand," asked Gavin, slyly, "that your locket came into your possession in your pre-smoking days, and that you merely wear it from habit?" "Tuts," answered the doctor, buttoning his coat. "I told you there was nothing in the locket. If there is, I have forgotten what it is." "You are a hopeless old bachelor, I see," said Gavin, unaware that the doctor was probing him. He was surprised next moment to find McQueen in the ecstasies of one who has won a rubber. "Now then," cried the jubilant doctor, "as you have confessed so much, tell me all about her. Name and address, please." "Confess? What have I confessed?" "It won't do, Mr. Dishart, for even your face betrays you. No, I am an old bird, but I have not forgotten the ways of the fledgelings. Hopeless bachelor, sir, is a sweetmeat in every young man's mouth until of a sudden he finds it sour. That means the banns. When is it to be?" "We must find the lady first," said the minister, uncomfortably. "You tell me, in spite of that face, that you have not fixed on her. The difficulty, I suppose, would be to persuade her to fix on me." "Not a bit of it. But you admit there is someone?" "Who would have me?" "You are wriggling out of it. Is it the banker's daughter?" "No," Gavin cried. "I hear you have walked up the back wynd with her 3 times this week. The town is in a ferment about it. She is a great deal in the back wynd." "Fiddle-dee-dee. I am oftener in the back wynd than you, and I never meet her there." "That is curious." "No, it isn't. But never mind. Perhaps you have fallen to Miss Pennyquick's piano. Did you hear it going as we passed the house?" "She seems always to be playing on her piano." "Not she. But you are supposed to be musical, and so when she sees you from her window she begins to thump. If I am in the school wynd and hear the piano going, I know you will turn the corner immediately. However, I am glad to hear it is not Mrs. Pennyquick. Then it is the factor at the Spittals, lassie? Well done, sir. You should arrange to have the wedding at the same time as the old earl's, which comes off in summer, I believe." "One foolish marriage is enough in a day, doctor." "Eh? You call him a fool for marrying a young wife? Well, no doubt he is, but he would have been a bigger fool to marry an old one. However, it is not Lord Rintoul we are discussing, but Gavin Dishart. I suppose you know that the factor's lassie is an heiress?" "And therefore would scorn me." "Try her," said the doctor, dryly. "Her father and mother, as I know, married on a £10 note. But if I am wrong again, I must adopt the popular view in Thrums. It is a Glasgow lady after all? Man, you needn't look indignant at hearing that the people are discussing your intended. You can no more stop it than a doctor's orders could keep Lang Tammas out of church." "They have discovered that she sends you flowers twice every week." "They never reach me," answered Gavin, then remembered the holly and winced. "Some," persisted the relentless doctor, "even speak of your having been seen together. But of course, if she is a Glasgow lady, that is a mistake." "Where did they see us?" asked Gavin, with a sudden trouble in his throat. "You are shaking," said the doctor, keenly, "like a medical student at his first operation. But as for the story that you and the lady have been seen together, I can guess how it arose. Do you remember that gypsy girl?" The doctor had begun by addressing the fire, but he suddenly wheeled round and fired his questions in the minister's face. Gavin, however, did not even blink. "Why should I have forgotten her?" he replied, coolly. "Oh, in the stress of other occupations. But it was your getting the money from her at Kaims for Nanny that I was to speak of. Absurd though it seems, I think some dotard must have seen you and her at the Kaims, and mistaken her for the lady." McQueen flung himself back in his chair to enjoy this joke. "Fancy mistaking that woman for a lady," he said to Gavin, who had not laughed with him. "I think Nanny has some justification for considering her a lady," the minister said, firmly. "Well, I grant that. But what made me guffaw was a vision of the harum-scarum devil-may-care little Egyptian mistress of an Auld Licht manse." "She is neither harum-scarum nor devil-may-care," Gavin answered without heat, for he was no longer a distracted minister. "You don't understand her as I do." "No, I seem to understand her differently." What do you know of her?" "That is just it," said the doctor, irritated by Gavin's coolness. "I know she saved Nanny from the poorhouse, but I don't know where she got the money. I know she can talk fine English when she chooses, but I don't know where she learned it. I know she heard that the soldiers were coming to Thrums before they knew of their destination themselves, but I don't know who told her. You, who understand her, can doubtless explain these matters?" "She offered to explain them to me," Gavin answered, still unmoved, "but I forbade her." "Why?" "It is no business of yours, doctor. Forgive me for saying so." "In Thrums," replied McQueen, "a minister's business is everybody's business. I have often wondered who helped her to escape from the soldiers that night. Did she offer to explain that to you?" "She did not." "Perhaps," said the doctor sharply, "because it was unnecessary?" "That was the reason." "You helped her escape?" "I did." "And you are not ashamed of it?" "I am not." "Why were you so anxious to screen her?" "She saved some of my people from gaol." "Which was more than they deserved." "I have always understood that you concealed two of them in your own stable." "Maybe I did," the doctor had to allow, "but I took my stick to them next morning. Besides, they were Thrums folk, while you had never set eyes on that imp of mischief before." "I cannot sit here, doctor, and hear her called names," Gavin said, rising, but McQueen gripped him by the shoulder. "For pity's sake, sir, don't let us wrangle like a pair of women. I brought you here to speak my mind to you, and speak it I will. I warn you, Mr. Dishart, that you are being watched. You have been seen meeting this lassie in Caddam as well as at the Kaims. Let the whole town watch, doctor. I have met her openly." "And why? Oh, don't make Nanny your excuse." "I won't. I met her because I love her." "Are you mad?" cried McQueen. "You speak as if you would marry her." "Yes," replied Gavin, determinedly, "I mean to do it." The doctor flung up his hands. "I give you up," he said, raging. "I give you up. Think of your congregation, man." "I have been thinking of them, and as soon as I have a right to do so, I shall tell them what I have told you." "And until you tell them I will keep your madness to myself, for I warn you that, as soon as they know, there will be a vacancy at the Auld Licht Kirk of Thrums." "She is a woman," said Gavin, hesitating, though preparing to go, "of whom any minister might be proud." "She is a woman," the doctor roared, "that no congregation would stand. Oh, if you will go, there is your hat." Perhaps Gavin's face was whiter as he left the house than when he entered it, but there was no other change. Those who were watching him decided that he was looking much as usual, except that his mouth was shut very firm, from which they concluded that he had been taking the doctor to task for smoking. They also noted that he returned to McQueen's house within half an hour after leaving it, but remained no time. Some explained this second visit by saying that the minister had forgotten his cravat and had gone back for it. What really sent him back, however, was his conscience. He had said to McQueen that he helped Babbie escape from the soldiers because of kindness to his people, and he returned to own that it was a lie. Gavin knocked at the door of the surgery, but entered without waiting for a response. McQueen was no longer stamping through the room, red and furious. He had even laid aside his pipe. He was sitting back in his chair, looking half mournfully, half contemptuously at something in his palm. His hand closed instinctively when he heard the door open, but Gavin had seen that the object was an open locket. "It was only your reference to the thing," the detected doctor said, with a grim laugh, "that made me open it. 40 years ago, sir, Phew! It is 42 years, and I have not got over it yet." He closed the locket with a snap. "I hope you have come back, Dishart, to speak more rationally." Gavin told him why he had come back, and the doctor said he was a fool for his pains. "It is useless, Dishart, to make another appeal to you." "Quite useless, doctor," Gavin answered promptly. "My mind is made up at last." End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 21. Night. Margaret. Flashing of a lantern. That evening the little minister sat silently in his parlour, Darkness came, and with it weavers rose heavy-eyed from their looms, sleepy children sought their mothers, and the gate of the field above the manse fell forward to let cows pass to their byre. The great Bible was produced in many homes, and the 10 o'clock bell clanged its last word to the night. Margaret had allowed the lamp to burn low. Thinking that her boy slept, she moved softly to his side and spread her shawl over his knees. He had forgotten her. The doctor's warnings scarcely troubled him. He was Babbie's lover. The mystery of her was only a veil hiding her from other men, and he was looking through it upon the face of his beloved. It was a night of long ago, but can you not see my dear Margaret still as she bends over her son? Not twice in many days dared the minister snatch a moment's sleep from grey morning to midnight, and when this did happen he jumped up by and by in shame to revile himself for an idler, and ask his mother wrathfully why she had not tumbled him out of his chair. To-night Margaret was divided between a desire to let him sleep and a fear of his self-reproach when he awoke, and so, perhaps, the tear fell that roused him. "I did not like to waken you," Margaret said apprehensively. "You must have been very tired, Gavin." "I was not sleeping, mother," he said slowly. "I was only thinking." "Ah, Gavin, you never rise from your loom. It is hardly fair that your hands should be so full of other people's troubles." "They only fill one hand, mother. I carry the people's joys in the other hand, and that keeps me erect, like a woman between her pan and pitcher. I think the joys have outweighed the sorrows since we came here." "It has been all joy to me, Gavin, for you never tell me of the sorrows. An old woman has no right to be so happy." "Old woman, mother," said Gavin, but his indignation was vain. Margaret was an old woman. I made her old before her time. "As for these terrible troubles," he went on, "I forget them the moment I enter the garden and see you at your window. And maybe I keep some of the joys from you as well as the troubles." Words about Babbie leapt to his mouth, but with an effort he restrained them. He must not tell his mother of her until Babbie of her free will had told him all there was to tell. "I had been a selfish woman, Gavin." "You selfish, mother?" Gavin said, smiling. "Tell me when you did not think of others before yourself." "Always, Gavin. Has it not been selfishness to hope that you would never want to bring another mistress to the manse? Do you remember how angry you used to be in Glasgow when I said that you would marry some day?" "I remember," Gavin said sadly. "Yes, you used to say, 'Don't speak of such a thing, mother, for the horrid thought of it is enough to drive all the Hebrew out of my head.' Was not that lightning just now?" "I did not see it. What a memory you have, mother, for all the boyish things I said." "I can't deny," Margaret admitted with a sigh, "that I liked to hear you speak in that way, though I knew you would go back on your word. You see, you have changed already." "How, mother?" asked Gavin, surprised. "You said just now that those were boyish speeches. Gavin, I can't understand the mothers who are glad to see their sons married. Though I had a dozen, I believe it would be a wrench to lose one of them. It would be different with daughters. You are laughing, Gavin." "Yes, at your reference to daughters. Would you not have preferred me to be a girl?" "Deed, I would not," answered Margaret, with tremendous conviction. "Gavin, every woman on earth, be she rich or poor, good or bad, offers up one prayer about her firstborn, and that is, may he be a boy." "I think you are wrong, mother. The banker's wife told me that there is nothing for which she thanks the Lord so much as that all her children are girls." "May she be forgiven for that, Gavin," exclaimed Margaret, "though she maybe did right to put the best face on her humiliation. No, there are many kinds of women in the world, but there never was one yet that didna want to begin with a laddie. You can speculate about a boy so much more than about a girl. Gavin, what is it a woman thinks about the day her son is born? Yes, and the day before too. She is picturing him a grown-up man, a slip of a lassie taking him from her. Ay, that is why the lassies have their revenge on the mothers. I remember as if it were this morning a Harvie fishwife patting your head and asking who was your sweetheart, and I could never thole that woman again. We were at the door of the cottage, and I mind I gripped you up in my arms. You had on a tartan frock with a sash and diamond stocks. When I look back, Gavin, it seems to me that you have shot up from that frock to manhood in a single hour." There are not many mothers like you," Gavin said, laying his hand fondly on Margaret's shoulder. "There are many better mothers, but few such sons. It is easily seen why God could not afford me another. Gavin, I am sure that was lightning." "I think it was, but don't be alarmed, mother." "I am never frightened when you are with me." "And I always will be with you." If you were married." "Do you think," asked Gavin, indignantly, "that it would make any difference to you?" Margaret did not answer. She knew what difference it would make. "Except," continued Gavin, with a man's obtuseness, "that you would have a daughter as well as a son to love you and take care of you." Margaret could have told him that men give themselves away needlessly who marry for the sake of their mother, but all she said was, "Gavin, I see you can speak more composedly of marrying now than you spoke a year ago. If I did not know better, I should think a Thrums young lady had got hold of you." It was a moment before Gavin replied. Then he said gaily, "Really, mother, the way the best of women speak of each other is lamentable. You say I should be better married, and then you take for granted that every marriageable woman in the neighbourhood is trying to kidnap me. I am sure you did not take my father by force in that way." He did not see that Margaret trembled at the mention of his father. He never knew that she was many times pining to lay her head upon his breast and tell him of me. Yet I cannot but believe that she always shook when Adam Dishart was spoken of between them. I cannot think that the long cherishing of the secret which was hers and mine kept her face steady when that horror suddenly confronted her as now. Gavin would have suspected much had he ever suspected anything. "I know," Margaret said, courageously, "that you would be better married. But when it comes to selecting the woman I grow fearful. Oh, Gavin," she said, earnestly, "it is an awful thing to marry the wrong man." Here in a moment she had revealed much, though far from all, and there must have been many such moments between them. But Gavin was thinking of his own affairs. "You mean the wrong woman, don't you, mother?" he said, and she hastened to agree, but it was the wrong man she meant. "The difficulty, I suppose, is to hit upon the right one," Gavin said, blithely. "To know which is the right one in time," answered Margaret, solemnly. "But I am saying nothing against the young ladies of Thrums, Gavin. Though I have scarcely seen them, I know there are good women among them. Jean says—" "I believe, mother," Gavin interposed, reproachfully, "that you have been questioning Jean about them?" "Just because I was afraid — because I fancied you might be taking a liking to one of them." "And what is Jean's verdict?" "She says every one of them would jump at you like a bird at a berry." "But the berry cannot be divided. How would Miss Pennycuick please you, mother?" "Gavin!" cried Margaret, in consternation. "You don't mean to — but you are laughing at me again." "Then there is the banker's daughter?" "I can't thole her." "Why, I question if you ever set eyes on her, mother." "Perhaps not, Gavin, but I have suspected her ever since she offered to become one of your tract distributors." "The doctor," said Gavin, not ill pleased, "was saying that either of these ladies would suit me." "What business has he," asked Margaret, vindictively, "to put such thoughts into your head?" "But he only did as you are doing. Mother, I see you will never be satisfied without selecting the woman for me yourself." "Ay, Gavin," said Margaret, earnestly, "and I question if I should be satisfied even then. But I am sure I should be a better guide to you than Dr. McQueen is." "Oh, I am convinced of that. But I wonder what sort of woman would content you?" "Whoever pleased you, Gavin, would content me," Margaret ventured to maintain. "You would only take to a clever woman." "She must be nearly as clever as you, mother." "Hoots, Gavin," said Margaret, smiling, "I'm not to be caught with chaff. I am a stupid, ignorant woman." "Then I must look out for a stupid, ignorant woman, for that seems to be the kind I like," answered Gavin, of whom I may confess here something that has to be told sooner or later. It is this: he never realized that Babbie was a great deal cleverer than himself. Forgive him, you who read, if you have any tolerance for the creature man. "She will be terribly learned in languages," pursued Margaret, "so that she may follow you in your studies, as I have never been able to do." "Your face has helped me more than Hebrew, mother," replied Gavin. "I will give her no marks for languages." "At any rate," Margaret insisted, "she must be a grand housekeeper, and very thrifty." "As for that," Gavin said, faltering a little, "one can't expect it of a mere girl." "I should expect it," maintained his mother. No, but she would have you," said Gavin, happily, "to teach her housekeeping." "It would be a pleasant occupation to me, that," Margaret admitted, "and she would soon learn. She would be so proud of her position as mistress of a manse." "Perhaps," Gavin said doubtfully. He had no doubt on the subject in his college days. "And we can take for granted," continued his mother, "that she is a lassie of fine character." "Of course," said Gavin, holding his head high, as if he thought the doctor might be watching him. "I have thought," Margaret went on, "that there was a great deal of wisdom in what you said at that last marriage in the manse, the one where, you remember, the best man and the bridesmaid joined hands instead of the bride and the bridegroom." "What did I say?" asked the little minister, with misgivings. "That there was a great danger when people married out of their own rank of life." Well, of course that would depend on circumstances." "They were wise words, Gavin. There was the sermon, too, that you preached a month or two ago against marrying into other denominations. Jean told me that it greatly impressed the congregation. It is a sad sight, as you say, to see an Auld Licht lassie changing her faith because her man belongs to the U.P.'s." "Did I say that?" "You did, and it so struck Jean that she told me she would rather be an old maid for life, the which, she said, is a dismal prospect, than marry out of the Auld Licht kirk." "Perhaps that was a rather narrow view I took, mother. After all, the fitting thing is that a wife should go with her husband, especially if it is he that is the Auld Licht." "I don't hold with narrowness myself, Gavin," Margaret said, with an effort, "and admit that there are many respectable persons in the other denominations. But though a weaver might take a wife from another kirk without much scandal, an Auld Licht minister's madam must be Auld Licht born and bred. The congregation would expect no less. I doubt if they would be sure of her if she came from some other Auld Licht kirk. 'Deed, though she came from our own kirk, I'm thinking the session would want to catechize her. Ay, and if all you tell me of Lang Tammas be true, for as you know I never spoke to him, I warrant he would catechize the session." "I would brook no interference from my session," said Gavin, knitting his brows, "and I do not consider it necessary that a minister's wife should have been brought up in his denomination. Of course she would join it. We must make allowance, mother, for the thousands of young women who live in places where there is no Auld Licht kirk." "You can pity them, Gavin," said Margaret, "without marrying them. A minister has his congregation to think of." "So the doctor says," interposed her son. "Then it was just like his presumption," cried Margaret. "A minister should marry to please himself." "Decidedly he should," Gavin agreed, eagerly, "and the bounden duty of the congregation is to respect and honour his choice. If they forget that duty, his is to remind them of it." Well, Gavin," Margaret said, confidently, "your congregation are so fond of you that your choice would doubtless be theirs. Jean tells me that even Lang Tammas, though he is so obstinate, has a love for you passing the love of woman. These were her words. Jean is more sentimental than you might think." "I wish he would show his love," said Gavin, "by contradicting me less frequently. You have Rob Dow to weigh against him." "No, I cannot make out what has come over Rob lately. He is drinking heavily again, and avoiding me. The lightning is becoming very vivid." "Yes, and I hear no thunder. There is another thing, Gavin. I am one of those that like to sit at home, but if you had a wife she would visit the congregation. A truly religious wife would be a great help to you." "Religious?" Gavin repeated slowly. "Yes, but some people are religious without speaking of it. If a woman is good, she is religious. A good woman who has been, let us say, foolishly brought up, only needs to be shown the right way to tread it. Mother, I question if any man, minister or layman, ever yet fell in love because the woman was thrifty or clever or went to church twice on Sabbath." "I believe that is true," Margaret said, "and I would not have it otherwise, but it is an awful thing, Gavin, as you said from the pulpit 2 weeks ago, to worship only at a beautiful face." "You think too much about what I say in the pulpit, mother," Gavin said with a sigh. "Though of course a man who fell in love merely with a face would be a contemptible creature. Yet I see that women do not understand how beauty affects a man." Yes, my boy. Oh, indeed they do," said Margaret, who on some matters knew far more than her son. 12 o'clock struck, and she rose to go to bed, alarmed lest she should not waken early in the morning. "But I'm afraid I shan't sleep," she said, "if that lightning continues." "It is harmless," Gavin answered, going to the window. He started back next moment, and crying, "Don't look out, mother," hastily pulled down the blind. "Why, Gavin," Margaret said in fear, "you look as if it had struck you." "Oh, no," Gavin answered, with a forced laugh, and he lit her lamp for her. But it had struck him, though it was not lightning. It was the flashing of a lantern against the window to attract his attention, and the holder of the lantern was Babbie. "Good night, mother." "Good night, Gavin. Don't sit up any later." End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 22. Lovers. Only something terrible, Gavin thought, could have brought Babbie to him at such an hour. Yet when he left his mother's room it was to stand motionless on the stair, waiting for a silence in the manse that would not come. A house is never still in the darkness to those who listen intently. There is a whispering in distant chambers. An unearthly hand presses the snib of the window. The latch rises. Ghosts were created when the first man woke in the night. Now Margaret slept. 2 hours earlier, Jean, sitting on the salt bucket, had read the chapter with which she always sent herself to bed. In honour of the little minister, she had begun her Bible afresh when he came to Thrums, and was progressing through it, a chapter at night, sighing, perhaps on washing days, at a long chapter, such as Exodus 12, but never making two of it. The kitchen wag-at-the-wall clock was telling every room in the house that she had neglected to shut her door. As Gavin felt his way down the dark stair, awakening it to protest at every step, he had a glimpse of the pendulum's shadow running back and forward on the hearth. He started back from another shadow on the lobby wall, and then, seeing it start too, knew it for his own. He opened the door and passed out unobserved. It was as if the sounds and shadows that filled the manse were too occupied with their game to mind an interloper. "Is that you?" he said to a bush, for the garden was in semi-darkness. Then the lantern's flash met him, and he saw the Egyptian in the summer seat. "At last," she said reproachfully. "Evidently a lantern is a poor doorbell." "What is it?" Gavin asked, in suppressed excitement, for the least he expected to hear was that she was again being pursued for her share in the riot. The tremor in his voice surprised her into silence, and he thought she faltered because what she had to tell him was so woeful. So in the darkness of the summer seat he kissed her, and she might have known that with that kiss the little minister was hers forever. Now Babbie had been kissed before, but never thus, and she turned from Gavin and would have liked to be alone, for she had begun to know what love was, and the flash that revealed it to her laid bare her own shame, so that her impulse was to hide herself from her lover. But of all this Gavin was unconscious, and he repeated his question. The lantern was swaying in her hand, and when she turned fearfully to him, its light fell on his face, and she saw how alarmed he was. "I am going away back to Nanny's," she said suddenly, and rose, cowed, but he took her hand and held her. "Babbie," he said huskily, "tell me what has happened to bring you here at this hour." She sought to pull her hand from him, but could not. "How you are trembling," he whispered. "Babbie," he cried, "something terrible has happened to you, but do not fear. Tell me what it is, and then I will take you to my mother. Yes, I will take you now." The Egyptian would have given all she had in the world to be able to fly from him then, that he might never know her as she was, but it could not be, and so she spoke out remorselessly. If her voice had become hard, it was a newborn scorn of herself that made it so. "You are needlessly alarmed," she said. "I am not at all the kind of person who deserves sympathy or expects it. There is nothing wrong. I am staying with Nanny overnight, and only came to Thrums to amuse myself. I chased your policeman down the Roods with my lantern, and then came here to amuse myself with you. That is all." "It was nothing but a love of mischief that brought you here?" Gavin asked sternly, after an unpleasant pause. "Nothing," the Egyptian answered recklessly. "I could not have believed this of you," the minister said. "I am ashamed of you." "I thought," Babbie retorted, trying to speak lightly until she could get away from him, "that you would be glad to see me. Your last words in Camden seemed to justify that idea." "I am very sorry to see you," he answered reproachfully. Then I will go away at once, she said, stepping out of the summer seat. Yes, he replied. You must go at once. Then I won't, she said, turning back defiantly. I know what you are to say, that the Thrums people would be shocked if they knew I was here. As if I cared what the Thrums people think of me. I care what they think of you, Gavin said, as if that were decisive. And I tell you I will not allow you to repeat this freak. You will not allow me, echoed Babbie, almost enjoying herself despite her sudden loss of self-respect. I will not, Gavin said resolutely. Henceforth you must do as I think fit. Since when have you taken command of me? Demanded Babbie. Since a minute ago, Gavin replied, when you let me kiss you. Let you? Exclaimed Babbie, now justly incensed. You did it yourself. I was very angry. No, you were not. I am not allowed to say even that, asked the Egyptian. Tell me something I may say then, and I will repeat it after you. I have something to say to you, Gavin told her after a moment's reflection. Yes, and there is something I should like to hear you repeat after me, but not tonight. I don't want to hear what it is, Babbie said quickly, but she knew what it was, and even then, despite the new pain at her heart, her bosom swelled with pride because this man still loved her. Now she wanted to run away with his love for her before he could take it from her, and then realizing that this parting must be forever, a great desire filled her to hear him put that kiss into words, and she said, faltering, You can tell me what it is if you like. Not tonight, said Gavin. Tonight, if at all, the gypsy almost entreated. Tomorrow at Nanny's, answered Gavin decisively, and this time he remembered without dismay that the morrow was the Sabbath. In the fairy tale the beast suddenly drops his skin and is a prince, and I believed it seemed to Babbie that some such change had come over this man, her plaything. Your lantern is shining on my mother's window, were the words that woke her from this discovery, and then she found herself yielding the lantern to him. She became conscious vaguely that a corresponding change was taking place in herself. You spoke of taking me to your mother, she said bitterly. Yes, he answered at once, tomorrow. But she shook her head, knowing that tomorrow he would be wiser. Give me the lantern, she said in a low voice. I am going back to Nanny's now. Yes, he said, we must set out now, but I can carry the lantern. You are not coming with me, she exclaimed, shaking herself free of his hand. I am coming, he replied calmly, though he was not calm. Take my arm, Babbie. She made a last effort to free herself from bondage, crying passionately, I will not let you come. When I say I am coming, Gavin answered between his teeth, I mean that I am coming, and so let that be an end of this folly. Take my arm. I think I hate you, she said, retreating from him. Take my arm, he repeated, and though her breast was rising rebelliously, she did as he ordered, and so he escorted her from the garden. At the foot of the field she stopped and thought to frighten him by saying, What would the people say if they saw you with me now? It does not matter what they would say, he answered, still keeping his teeth together as if doubtful of their courage. As for what they would do, that is certain. They would put me out of my church. And is it dear to you? Dearer than life. You told me long ago that your mother's heart would break if— Yes, I am sure it would. They had begun to climb the fields, but she stopped him with a jerk. Go back, Mr. Dishart, she implored, clutching his arm with both hands. You make me very unhappy for no purpose. Oh, why should you risk so much for me? I cannot have you wandering here alone at midnight, Gavin answered gently. That is nothing to me, she said eagerly, but no longer resenting his air of proprietorship. You will never do it again if I can prevent it. But you cannot, she said sadly. Oh, yes, you can, Mr. Dishart. If you will turn back now, I shall promise never to do anything again without first asking myself whether it would seem right to you. I know I acted very wrongly tonight. Only thoughtlessly, he said. Then have pity on me, she besought him, and go back. If I have only been thoughtless, how can you punish me thus? Mr. Dishart, she entreated, her voice breaking, if you were to suffer for this folly of mine, do you think I could live? We are in God's hands, dear, he answered firmly, and he again drew her arm to him. So they climbed the first field and were almost at the hill before either spoke again. Stop, Babbie whispered, crouching as she spoke. I see someone crossing the hill. I have seen him for some time, Gavin answered quietly, but I am doing no wrong, and I will not hide. The Egyptian had to walk on with him, and I suppose she did not think the less of him for that. Yet she said warningly, If he sees you, all Thrums will be in an uproar before morning. I cannot help that, Gavin replied. It is the will of God. To ruin you for my sins? If he thinks fit. The figure drew nearer, and with every step Babbie's distress doubled. We are walking straight to him, she whispered. I implore you to wait here until he passes, if not for your own sake, for your mother's. At that he wavered, and she heard his teeth sliding against each other, as if he could no longer clench them. But no, he said, moving on again, I will not be a skulker from any man. If it be God's wish that I should suffer for this, I must suffer. Oh, why, cried Babbie, beating her hands together in grief, should you suffer for me? You are mine, Gavin answered. Babbie gasped. And if you act foolishly, he continued, it is right that I should bear the brunt of it. No, I will not let you go on alone. You are not fit to be alone. You need someone to watch over you and care for you and love you, and if need be, to suffer with you. Turn back, dear, before he sees us. He has seen us. Yes, I had seen them, for the figure on the hill was no other than the dominie of Glen Quharity. The park gate clicked as it swung to, and I looked up and saw Gavin and the Egyptian. My eyes should have found them sooner, but it was to gaze upon Margaret's home while no one saw me that I had trudged into Thrums so late, and by that time, I suppose, my eyes were of little service for seeing through. Yet when I knew that of these two people suddenly beside me on the hill, one was the little minister and the other a strange woman, I fell back from their side with dread before I could step forward and cry, Gavin! I am Mr. Dishart, he answered, with a composure that would not have served him for another sentence. He was more excited than I, for the Gavin fell harmlessly on him, while I had no sooner uttered it than there rushed through me the shame of being false to Margaret. It was the only time in my life that I forgot her in him, though he has ever stood next to her in my regard. I looked from Gavin to the gypsy woman, and again from her to him, and she began to tell a lie in his interest, but she got no further than, I met Mr. Dishart when she stopped, ashamed. It was reverence for Gavin that checked the lie. Not every man has had such a compliment paid him. It is natural, Gavin said slowly, that you, sir, should wonder why I am here with this woman at such an hour, and you may know me so little as to think ill of me for it. I did not answer, and he misunderstood my silence. No, he continued in a harder voice, as if I had asked him a question, I will explain nothing to you. You are not my judge. If you would do me harm, sir, you have it in your power. It was with these cruel words that Gavin addressed me. He did not know how cruel they were. The Egyptian, I think, must have seen that his suspicions hurt me, for she said softly, with a look of appeal in her eyes, You are the schoolmaster in Glen Quharity. Then you will perhaps save Mr. Dishart the trouble of coming farther by showing me the way to old Nanny Webster's house at Windyghoul. I have to pass the house at any rate, I answered eagerly, and she came quickly to my side. I knew, though in the darkness I could see but vaguely, that Gavin was holding his head high and waiting for me to say my worst. I had not told him that I dared think no evil of them, and he still suspected me. Now I would not trust myself to speak, lest I should betray Margaret, and yet I wanted him to know that base doubts about him could never find a shelter in me. I am a timid man who long ago lost the glory of my life by it, and I was again timid when I sought to let Gavin see that my faith in him was unshaken. I lifted my bonnet to the gypsy and asked her to take my arm. It was done clumsily, I cannot doubt, but he read my meaning and held out his hand to me. I had not touched it since he was 3 years old, and I trembled too much to give it the grasp I owed it. He and I parted without a word, but to the Egyptian he said, To-morrow, dear, I will see you at Nanny's, and he was to kiss her, but I pulled her a step farther from him, and she put her hands over her face, crying, No, no. If I asked her some questions between the hill and Windyghoul, you must not blame me, for this was my affair as well as theirs. She did not answer me. I know now that she did not hear me, but at the mud house she looked abruptly into my face and said, You love him too. I trudged to the schoolhouse with these words for company, and it was less her discovery than her confession that tortured me. How much I slept that night you may guess. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister, by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 23. Contains a birth, which is sufficient for one chapter. "The kirk bell will soon be ringing," Nanny said on the following morning, as she placed herself carefully on a stool, one hand holding her Bible, and the other wandering complacently over her aged merino gown. "Ay, lassie, though you're only an Egyptian, I would I ta'en you with me to hear Mr. Duthie, but it's speiring ower muckle o' a woman to expect her to gang to the kirk in her ilka day claes." The Babbie of yesterday would have laughed at this. The new Babbie sighed. "I wonder you don't go to Mr. Dishart's church now, Nanny," she said gently. "I am sure you prefer him." Babbie," exclaimed Nanny with spirit. "May I never be so far left to myself as to change my kirk just because I like another minister better. It's easy seen, lassie, that you ken little o' religious questions." "Very little," Babbie admitted sadly. "But dinna be so waeful about it," the old woman continued kindly, "for that's no nane like you. Ay, and if you see muckle mair o' Mr. Dishart, he'll soon cure your ignorance." "I shall not see much more of him," Babbie answered, with averted head. "The like o' you couldna expect it," Nanny said simply, whereupon Babbie went to the window. "I had better be stepping," Nanny said, rising, "for I am aye late unless I'm on the hill by the time the bell begins. Ay, Babbie, I'm doubting my merino's no sair in the fashion." She looked down at her dress, half despondently, and yet with some pride. "It was 4 pence the yard, and no less," she went on, fondling the worn merino, "when we bocht it at Sam'l Curr's. Ay, but it's been turned 6 times since syne." She sighed, and Babbie came to her and put her arms round her, saying, "Nanny, you are a dear." "I'm a gey old farrant looking dear, I doubt," said Nanny ruefully. "Now, Nanny," rejoined Babbie, "you are just wanting me to flatter you. You know the merino looks very nice." "It's a good merino yet," admitted the old woman, "but oh, Babbie, what does the material matter if the cut isna fashionable? It's fine, isn't it, to be in the fashion?" She spoke so wistfully that instead of smiling Babbie kissed her. "I'm afraid to lay hand on the merino, Nanny, but give me off your bonnet, and I'll make it 10 years younger in as many minutes." "Could you?" asked Nanny eagerly, unloosening her bonnet strings. "Mercy on me," she had to add, "to think about altering bonnets on the Sabbath day. Lassie, how could you propose sic a thing?" "Forgive me, Nanny," Babbie replied so meekly that the old woman looked at her curiously. "I dinna understand what come ower you," she said. "There's an unca difference in you since last nicht. I used to think you were mair like a bird than a lassie, but you've lost your daft capers o' singing and laughing, and I take it ill wi't. 2 or 3 times I've catched you greeting. Babbie, what has come ower you?" "Nothing, Nanny. I think I hear the bell." Down in Thrums 2 kirk officers had let their bells loose, waking echoes in Windyghoul as one dog in country parts sets all the others barking. But Nanny did not hurry off to church. Such a surprising notion had filled her head suddenly that she even forgot to hold her dress off the floor. "Babbie," she cried in consternation, "dinna tell me you've gotten ower fond o' Mr. Dishart." "The like of me, Nanny," the gypsy answered with affected raillery, but there was a tear in her eye. "It would be a wild, presumptuous thing," Nanny said, "and him a grand minister, but—" Babbie tried to look her in the face, but failed, and then all at once there came back to Nanny the days when she and her lover wandered the hill together. "Oh, my dawtie," she cried so tenderly, "what does it matter what he is when you canna help it?" 2 frail arms went round the Egyptian, and Babbie rested her head on the old woman's breast. But do you think it could have happened had not Nanny loved a weaver 20 years before? And now Nanny has set off for church, and Babbie is alone in the mudhouse. Some will pity her not at all. This girl was a dozen women in the hour, and all made of impulses that would scarce stand still to be photographed. To attempt to picture her at any time until now would have been like chasing a spirit that changes to something else as your arms clasp it. Yet she has always seemed a pathetic little figure to me. If I understand Babbie at all, it is, I think, because I loved Margaret, the only woman I have ever known well, and one whose nature was not, like the Egyptians, complex, but most simple, as if God had told her only to be good. Throughout my life since she came into it, she has been to me a glass in which many things are revealed, that I could not have learned save through her, and something of all womankind, even of bewildering Babbie, I seem to know because I knew Margaret. No woman is so bad but we may rejoice when her heart thrills to love, for then God has her by the hand. There is no love but this. She may dream of what love is, but it is only of a sudden that she knows. Babbie, who was without a guide from her baby days, had dreamed but little of it, hearing its name given to another thing. She had been born wild and known no home. No one had touched her heart except to strike it. She had been educated, but never tamed. Her life had been thrown strangely among those who were great in the world's possessions, but she was not one of them. Her soul was in such darkness that she had never seen it. She would have danced away cynically from the belief that there is such a thing, and now all at once she had passed from disbelief to knowledge. Is not love God's doing? To Gavin he had given something of himself, and the moment she saw it the flash lit her own soul. It was but little of his master that was in Gavin, but far smaller things have changed the current of human lives. The spider's thread that strikes your brow on a country road may do that. Yet this I will say, though I have no wish to cast the little minister on my pages larger than he was, that he had some heroic hours in Thrums, of which one was when Babbie learned to love him. Until the moment when he kissed her, she had only conceived him a quaint fellow whose life was a string of Sundays. But behold what she saw in him now. Evidently, to his noble mind, her mystery was only some misfortune, not of her making, and his was to be part of the leading her away from it into the happiness of the open life. He did not doubt her, for he loved, and to doubt is to dip love in the mire. She had been given to him by God, and he was so rich in her possession that the responsibility attached to the gift was not grievous. She was his, and no mortal man could part them. Those who looked askance at her were looking askance at him. Insofar as she was wayward and wild, he was those things. So long as she remained strange to religion, the blame lay on him. All this Babbie read in the Gavin of the past night, and to her it was the book of love. What things she had known, said, and done in that holy name. How shamefully have we all besmirched it. She had only known it as the most selfish of the passions, a brittle image that men consulted because it could only answer in the words they gave it to say. But here was a man to whom love was something better than his own desires leering on a pedestal. Such love as Babbie had seen hitherto made strong men weak, but this was a love that made a weak man strong. All her life strength had been her idol, and the weakness that bent to her cajolery her scorn. But only now was it revealed to her that strength, instead of being the lusty child of passions, grows by grappling with and throwing them. So Babbie loved the little minister for the best that she had ever seen in man. I shall be told that she thought far more of him than he deserved, forgetting the mean in the worthy. But who that has had a glimpse of heaven will care to let his mind dwell henceforth on earth? Love, it is said, is blind, but love is not blind. It is an extra eye, which shows us what is most worthy of regard. To see the best is to see most clearly, and it is the lover's privilege. Down in the Auld Licht kirk that forenoon Gavin preached a sermon in praise of women, and up in the mudhouse in Windyghoul Babbie sat alone. But it was the Sabbath day to her, the first Sabbath in her life. Her discovery had frozen her mind for a time, so that she could only stare at it with eyes that would not shut. But that had been in the night. Already her love seemed a thing of years, for it was as old as herself, as old as the new Babbie. It was such a clear delight that she clasped it to her, and exulted over it because it was hers, and then she cried over it because she must give it up. For Babbie must only look at this love and then turn from it. My heart aches for the little Egyptian, but the promised land would have remained invisible to her had she not realized that it was only for others. That was the condition of her seeing. End of chapter 23.
Chapter 24 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 24. The New World and the Women who may not dwell therein. Up here in the Glen schoolhouse, after my pupils have straggled home, there comes to me at times, and so sudden that it may be while I am infusing my tea, a hot desire to write great books. Perhaps an hour afterwards I rise, beaten from my desk, flinging all I have written into the fire, yet rescuing some of it on second thought, and curse myself as an inglenook man, for I see that one can only paint what he himself has felt, and in my passion I wish to have all the vices, even to being an impious man, that I may describe them better. For this I may be pardoned, it comes to nothing in the end, save that my tea is brackish. Yet though my solitary life in the glen is cheating me of many experiences, more helpful to a writer than to a Christian, it has not been so tame but that I can understand why Babbie cried when she went into Nanny's garden and saw the new world. Let no one who loves be called altogether unhappy. Even love unreturned has its rainbow, and Babbie knew that Gavin loved her. Yet she stood in woe among the stiff berry bushes, as one who stretches forth her hands to love and sees him looking for her, and knows she must shrink from the arms she would lie in, and only call to him in a voice he cannot hear. This is not a love that is always bitter, it grows sweet with age, but could that dry the tears of the little Egyptian, who had only been a woman for a day? Much was still dark to her. Of one obstacle that must keep her and Gavin ever apart she knew, and he did not. But had it been removed, she would have given herself to him humbly, not in her own longing, but because he wanted her. "Behold what I am," she could have said to him then, and left the rest to him, believing that her unworthiness would not drag him down, it would lose itself so readily in his strength. That Thrums could rise against such a man if he defied it, she did not believe, but she was to learn the truth presently from a child. To most of us, I suppose, has come some shock that was to make us different men from that hour, and yet how many days elapsed before something of the man we had been leapt up in us. Babbie thought she had buried her old impulsiveness, and then, remembering that from the top of the field she might see Gavin returning from church, she hastened to the hill to look upon him from a distance. Before she reached the gate where I had met her and him, however, she stopped, distressed at her selfishness, and asked bitterly, "Why am I so different from other women? Why should what is so easy to them be so hard to me?" "Gavin, my beloved!" the Egyptian cried in her agony, and the wind caught her words and flung them in the air, making sport of her. She wandered westward over the bleak hill, and by came to a great slab called the Standing Stone, on which children often sit and muse until they see gay ladies riding by on palfreys, a kind of horse, and knights in glittering armour, and goblins and fiery dragons, and other wonders now extinct, of which bare-legged laddies dream, as well as boys in socks. The Standing Stone is in the dyke that separates the hill from a fir wood, and it is the fairy book of Thrums. If you would be a knight yourself, you must sit on it and whisper to it your desire. Babbie came to the Standing Stone, and there was a little boy astride it. His hair stood up through holes in his bonnet, and he was very ragged and miserable. "Why are you crying, little boy?" Babbie asked him gently, but he did not look up, and the tongue was strange to him. "How are you greeting so sair?" she asked. "I'm no greeting very sair," he answered, turning his head from her, that a woman might not see his tears. "I'm no greeting so sair, but what I grat sairer when my mither died." "When did she die?" Babbie inquired. "Lang syne," he answered, still with averted face. "What is your name?" "Micah is my name. Rob Dow's my father." "And have you no brothers nor sisters?" asked Babbie, with a fellow feeling for him. "No, just my father." "You should be the better laddie to him then. Did your mother no tell you to be that afore she died?" "Ay," he answered. "She told me aye to hide the bottle from him when I could get hand on it. She took me into the bed to make me promise that, and syne she died." "Does your father drinna?" "He holds mair than any other man in Thrums," Micah replied, almost proudly. "And he strikes you?" Babbie asked compassionately. "That's a lie," retorted the boy fiercely. "Leastwise, he doesna strike me except when he's mortal, and syne I can jouk him." "What are you doing there?" "I'm wishing. It's a wishing stone." "You are wishing your father wouldna drink." "No, I'm not," answered Micah. "There was a lang time he didna drink, but the woman has sent him to it again. It's about her I'm wishing. I'm wishing she was in hell." "What woman is it?" asked Babbie, shuddering. "I dinna ken," Micah said, "but she's an ill ane. Did you ever see her at your father's house?" "Na, if he could get a grip o' her, he would break her ower his knee. I hearken to him saying that, when he's wild. He says she should be burned for a witch." "But if he hates her," asked Babbie, "how can she have such power over him?" "It's not him that she has hand of," replied Micah, still looking away from her. "What is it then?" "It's Mr. Dishart." Babbie was struck as if by an arrow from the wood. It was so unexpected that she gave a cry, and then for the first time Micah looked at her. "How should that send your father to the drink?" she asked, with an effort. "Because my father's mighty fond o' him," answered Micah, staring strangely at her, "and when the folk ken about the woman, they'll stane the minister out o' Thrums." The wood faded for a moment from the Egyptian's sight. When it came back, the boy had slid off the standing stone and was stealing away. "Why do you run from me?" Babbie asked pathetically. "I'm fleid at you," he gasped, coming to a standstill at a safe distance. "You're the woman." Babbie cowered before her little judge, and he drew nearer her slowly. "What makes you think that?" she asked. It was a curious time for Babbie's beauty to be paid its most princely compliment. "Because you're so bonny," Micah whispered across the dyke. Her tears gave him courage. "You might gang away," he entreated. "If you kent what a differ Mr. Dishart made in my father till you came, you would maybe gang away. When he's roaring foul I have to sleep in the wood, and it's awful cold. I'm doubting he'll kill me, woman, if you dinna gang away." Poor Babbie put her hand to her heart, but the innocent lad continued mercilessly. "If any shame comes to the minister, his old mother'll die. How have you such an ill will at the minister?" Babbie held up her hands like a supplicant. "I'll give you my rabbit," Micah said, "if you'll gang away. I've just the one." She shook her head, and misunderstanding her, he cried, with his knuckles in his eye, "I'll give you them both, though I'm mighty sweer to part with Spotty." Then at last Babbie found her voice. "Keep your rabbits, laddie," she said, "and greet no more. I'm gaun away." "And you'll never come back no more o' your life?" pleaded Micah. "Never no more o' my life," repeated Babbie. "And you'll leave the minister alone for ever and ever?" "For ever and ever." Micah rubbed his face dry and said, "Will you let me stand on the standing stone and watch you gaen away for ever and ever?" At that a sob broke from Babbie's heart, and looking at her doubtfully, Micah said, "Maybe you're gey ill for what you've done." "Ay," Babbie answered, "I'm gey ill for what I've done." A minute passed, and in her anguish she did not know that still she was standing at the dyke. Micah's voice roused her. "You said you would gang away, and you're not goin'." Then Babbie went away. The boy watched her across the hill. He climbed the standing stone, and gazed after her until she was but a coloured ribbon among the broom. When she disappeared into Windyghoul he ran home joyfully, and told his father what a good day's work he had done. Rob struck him for a fool for taking a gypsy's word, and warned him against speaking of the woman in Thrums. But though Dow believed that Gavin continued to meet the Egyptian secretly, he was wrong. A sum of money for Nanny was sent to the minister, but he could guess only from whom it came. In vain did he search for Babbie. Some months passed, and he gave up the search, persuaded that he should see her no more. He went about his duties with a drawn face that made many folk uneasy when it was stern, and pained them when it tried to smile. But to Margaret, though the effort was terrible, he was as he had ever been, and so no thought of a woman crossed her loving breast. End of chapter 24.
Chapter 25 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia MP in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 25. Beginning of the 24 hours. I can tell still how the whole of the glen was engaged about the hour of noon on the 4th of August month, a day to be among the last forgotten by any of us, though it began as quietly as a roaring march. At the Spittal, between which and Thrums this is a halfway house, were gathered 200 men in kilts, and many gentry from the neighbouring glens, to celebrate the earl's marriage, which was to take place on the morrow, and thither too had gone many of my pupils to gather gossip, at which girls of 6 are trustier hands than boys of 12. Those of us, however, who were neither children nor of gentle blood, remained at home, the farmers more taken up with the want of rain, now become a calamity, than with an old man's wedding, and their womenfolk wringing their hands for rain also, yet finding time to marvel at the marriages taking place at the Spittal instead of in England, of which the ignorant spoke vaguely as an estate of the bride's. For my own part, I could talk of the disastrous drought with Waster Lunny as I walked over his parched fields, but I had not such cause as he to brood upon it by day and night. The ins and outs of the earl's marriage were for discussing at a tea table where there were women to help one to conclusions, rather than for the reflections of a solitary dominie who had seen neither bride nor bridegroom. So it must be confessed that when I might have been regarding the sky moodily, or at the Spittal, where a free table that day invited all, I was sitting in the schoolhouse, heeling my left boot, on which I have always been a little hard. I made small speed, not through lack of craft, but because one can no more drive in tackets properly than take cities, unless he gives his whole mind to it, and half of mine was at the Auld Licht manse. Since our meeting 6 months earlier on the hill, I had not seen Gavin, but I had heard much of him, and of a kind to trouble me. I saw nothing queer about Mr. Dishart, was Waster Lunny's frequent story, till I hearkened to Elspeth speaking about it to the lasses. For I'm the last man Elspeth would tell onything to, though I'm her man, and syne I minded I had been noticing it for months. Elspeth says," he would go on, for he could no more forbear quoting his wife than complaining of her, "that the minister'll listen to you nowadays with his een glaring at you as if he had a perfectly passionate interest in what you were telling him, though it may be only about a hen with a croup, and then after all he hasna heard a syllab. Ay, I listened to Elspeth saying that when she thocht I was at the byre, and yet, would you believe it, when I says to her after lousing time, I've been noticing of late that the minister loses what a body tells him, all she answers is havers. Tod, but the woman's provoking." "I allow," Birse said, "that on the first Sabbath o' June month, and again on the third Sabbath, he poured out the word grandly, but I've ta'en note this curran Sabbaths that he's no michty magnificent, he's michty poor. There's something damming up his mind, and when he gets by it he's a roaring water, but when he doesna he's a despisable trickle. The folk thinks it's a woman that's getting in his way, but dinna tell me that about sic a scholar. I tell you he would gang ower a toon of women like a loaded cart ower new laid stones." Weir hobbled after me up the Roods one day, pelting me with remarks, though I was doing my best to get away from him. "Even Rob Dow sees there's something come over the minister," he bawled, "for Rob's fu' ilka Sabbath now. Ay, but this I will say for Mr. Dishart, that he aye gies me a civil word." I thought I had left the policeman behind with this, but next minute he roared, "And whatever is the matter with him, it has made him kindlier to me than ever." He must have taken the short cut through Lunan's close, for at the top of the Roods his voice again made up on me. "Dagone you for a cruel pack to put your fingers to your lugs ilka time I open my mouth." As for Waster Lunny's daughter Easy, who got her schooling free for redding up the schoolhouse and breaking my furniture, she would never have been off the gossip about the minister, for she was her mother in miniature, with a tongue that ran like a pump after the pans are full, not for use, but for the mere pleasure of spilling. On that awful 4th of August I not only had all this confused talk in my head, but reason for jumping my mind between it and the Egyptian, as if to catch them together unawares, and I was like one who, with the mechanism of a watch jumbled in his hand, could set it going if he had the art. Of the gypsy I knew nothing save what I had seen that night, yet what more was there to learn? I was aware that she loved Gavin and that he loved her. A moment had shown it to me. Now, with the Auld Lichts, I have the smith's acquaintance with his irons, and so I could not believe that they would suffer their minister to marry a vagrant. Had it not been for this knowledge, which made me fearful for Margaret, I would have done nothing to keep these two young people apart. Some to whom I have said this maintain that the Egyptian turned my head at our first meeting. Such an argument is not perhaps worth controverting. I admit that even now I straighten under the fire of a bright eye, as a pensioner may salute when he sees a young officer. In the shooting season, should I chance to be leaning over my dyke while English sportsmen pass, as is usually the case if I have seen them approaching, I remember naught of them save that they call me she, and in their greetings with whatever, which Waster Lunny takes to be a southern mode of speech. But the ladies dwell pleasantly in my memory, from their engaging faces to the pretty crumpled thing dangling on their arms, that is a hat or a basket, I am seldom sure which. The Egyptian's beauty, therefore, was a gladsome sight to me, and none the less so that I had come upon it as unexpectedly as some men step into a bog. Had she been alone when I met her, I cannot deny that I would have been content to look on her face without caring what was inside it. But she was with her lover, and that lover was Gavin, and so her face was to me as little for admiring as this glen in a thunderstorm, when I know that some fellow creature is lost in the hills. If, however, it was no quick liking for the gypsy that almost tempted me to leave these two lovers to each other, what was it? It was the warning of my own life. Adam Dishart had torn my arm from Margaret's, and I had not recovered the wrench in 18 years. Rather than act his part between these two, I felt tempted to tell them. Deplorable as the result may be if you who are a minister marry this vagabond, it will still be more deplorable if you do not. But there was Margaret to consider, and at thought of her I cursed the Egyptian aloud. What could I do to keep Gavin and the woman apart? I could tell him the secret of his mother's life. Would that be sufficient? It would if he loved Margaret, as I did not doubt. Pity for her would make him undergo any torture rather than she should suffer again. But to divulge our old connection would entail her discovery of me, and I questioned if even the saving of Gavin could destroy the bitterness of that. I might appeal to the Egyptian. I might tell her even what I shuddered to tell him. She cared for him, I was sure, well enough to have the courage to give him up, but where was I to find her? Were she and Gavin meeting still? Perhaps the change which had come over the little minister meant that they had parted. Yet what I had heard him say to her on the hill warned me not to trust in any such solution of the trouble. Boys play at casting a humming top into the midst of others on the ground, and if well aimed, it scatters them prettily. I seemed to be playing such a game with my thoughts, for each new one sent the others here and there. And so what could I do in the end but fling my tops aside and return to the heeling of my boot? I was thus engaged when the sudden waking of the glen into life took me to my window. There is seldom silence up here, for if the wind be not sweeping the heather, the coharity that I may not have heard for days seems to have crept nearer to the schoolhouse in the night, and if both wind and water be out of earshot, there is the crack of a gun, or Waster Lunny's shepherd is on a stone near at hand whistling, or a lamb is scrambling through a fence and kicking foolishly with its hind legs. These sounds I am unaware of until they stop, when I look up. Such a stillness was broken now by music. From my window I saw a string of people walking rapidly down the glen, and Waster Lunny crossing his potato field to meet them. Remembering that, though I was in my stocking soles, the ground was dry, I hastened to join the farmer, for I like to miss nothing. I saw a curious sight. In front of the little procession coming down the glen road, and so much more impressive than his satellites that they may be put out of mind as merely ploughmen and the like following a show, was a Highlander that I knew to be Lauchlan Campbell, one of the pipers engaged to lend music to the earl's marriage. He had the name of a thrawn man when sober, but pretty at the pipes at both times, and he came marching down the glen blowing gloriously as if he had the clan of Campbell at his heels. I know no man who is so capable on occasion of looking like 20 as a Highland piper, and never have I seen a face in such a blaze of passion as was Lauchlan Campbell's that day. His following were keeping out of his reach, jumping back every time he turned round to shake his fist in the direction of the Spittal. While this magnificent man was yet some yards from us, I saw Waster Lunny, who had been in the middle of the road to ask questions, fall back in fear, and not being a fighting man myself, I jumped the dyke. Lauchlan gave me a look that sent me farther into the field, and strutted past, shrieking defiance through his pipes, until I lost him and his followers in a bend of the road. "That's a terrifying spectacle," I heard Waster Lunny say when the music had become but a distant squeal. "You're bonny at looping dykes, dominie, when there is a wild bull in front of you. Now I cannot tell what has happened, but at least Lauchlan maun hae dirked the earl. Thae loons cried out to me as they gaed by that he has been blawing away at their tune till he canna halt. What a wind's in the crittur! I'm thinking there's a hell in ilka Highlandman." "Take care then, Waster Lunny, that you dinna licht it," said an angry voice that made us jump, though it was only Duncan, the farmer's shepherd, who spoke. "I had forgotten you was a Highlandman yoursel', Duncan," Waster Lunny said nervously. But Elspeth, who had come to us unnoticed, ordered the shepherd to return to the hillside, which he did haughtily. Did you no lay hand on that blast of wind Lachlan Campbell?" asked Elspeth of her husband, "and spirit him what happened at the Spittal? A quarrel afore a marriage brings ill luck." "I'm thinking," said the farmer, "that Rintoul's making his ain ill luck by marrying on a young leddy." "A man's never o'er old to marry," said Elspeth. "No, nor a woman," rejoined Waster Lunny, "when she gets the chance. But, Elspeth, I believe I can guess what has fired that fearsome piper. Depend upon it, somebody has been speaking disrespectful about the crittur's ancestors." "His ancestors!" exclaimed Elspeth. "I'm thinking mine could hae balked them at a crown the dozen." "Hoots," said the farmer, "you're a weaving stock and dinna understand about ancestors. Take a stick to a Highland laddie and it's no him you hurt, but his ancestors. Likewise it's his ancestors that stanes you for it. When Duncan stalked awa the now, what think you he saw? He saw a farmer's wife daring to order about his ancestors. And if that's the way wi' a shepherd, what will it be wi' a piper that has the kilts on him a day to mind him of his ancestors ilka time he looks down?" Elspeth retired to discuss the probable disturbance at the Spittal with her family, giving Waster Lunny the opportunity of saying to me impressively, Man, it has never crossed you that it's a queer thing the like o' you and me having no ancestors? Ay, we had them in a manner o' speaking, no doubt, but they're as completely lost sicht of as a flagon lid that's fallen ahint the dresser. Hecht, sirs, but they would need a gey rubbing to get the rust off them now. I've been thinking that if I was to get my laddies to say their grandfather's name a current times ilka day, like the catechism, and they were to do the same with their bairns, and it was continued in future generations, we micht raise the fell field ancestors in time. Ay, but Elspeth wouldna hear it. Nothing angers her mair than to hear me speaking of planting trees for the benefit of them that's to be farmers here after me. And as for ancestors, she would howk them up as quick as I could plant them. Losh, dominie, is that a boot in your hand?" To my mortification, I saw that I had run out of the schoolhouse with the boot on my hand as if it were a glove, and back I went straight away, blaming myself for a man wanting in dignity. But it was a minor trouble this, however, even at the time, and to recall it later in the day was to look back on happiness, for though I did not know it yet, Lauchlan's playing raised the curtain on the great act of Gavin's life, and the 24 hours had begun, to which all I have told as yet is no more than the prologue. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 26. Scene at the Spittal. Within an hour after I had left him, Waster Lunny walked into the schoolhouse and handed me his snuff mull, which I declined politely. It was with this ceremony that we usually opened our conversations. "I've seen the post," he said, "and he tells me there has been a queer ploy at the Spittal. It's a wonder the marriage hasna been turned into a burial, and all because of that Highland stirk, Lachlan Campbell." Waster Lunny was a man who had to retrace his steps in telling a story if he tried short cuts, and so my custom was to wait patiently while he delved through the ploughed fields that always lay between him and his destination. "As you ken, Rintoul's so little of a Scotchman that he's no muckle better than an Englisher. That maun be the reason he hadna mair sense than to tramp on a Highlandman's ancestors as he tried to tramp on Lachlan's this day." "If Lord Rintoul insulted the piper," I suggested, giving the farmer a helping hand cautiously, "it would be through inadvertence. Rintoul only bought the Spittal a year ago, and until then I dare say he had seldom been on our side of the border." This was a foolish interruption, for it set Waster Lunny off in a new direction. "That's what Elspeth says. Says she, when the earl has grand estates in England, what for does he come to a barren place like the Spittal to be married? It's gey like, she says, and if he wanted the marriage to be got by quietly, a thing, she says, that no woman can stand. Furthermore, Elspeth says, how has the marriage been postponed twice? We ken what the servants at the Spittal says to that, namely that the young leddy is no keen to take him, but Elspeth winna listen to sich arguments. She says either the earl had grown timid, as mony a man does, when the wedding day drew near, or else his sister that keeps his house is mad at the thocht of losing her place. But as for the young lady's being sweer, says Elspeth, an earl's an earl, however auld he is, and a lassie's a lassie, however young she is, and weel she kens you're near sure of a man's no changing his mind about you till you're tied to him by law, after which it doesna so muckle matter whether he changes his mind about you or no. Ay, there's a quirk in it some gait, dominie, but it's a deep water Elspeth canna bottom." "It is," I agreed, "but you were to tell me what Birse told you of the disturbance at the Spittal." "I will," he answered. "The post puts the white o't on her little ladyship, as they call her, though she winna be a ladyship till the morn. All I can say is that if the earl was saft enough to do sic a thing out of fondness for her, it's time he was married on her, so that he may come to his senses again. That's what I say. But Elspeth counters me, of course, and says she, if the young lady was so careless of insulting other folks' ancestors, it proves she has nane of her ain, for them that has china plates themselves is the maist careful not to break the china plates of others." "But what was the insult? Was Lauchlan dismissed?" "No, fags, it was waur than that. Dominie, you're dull in the uptake compared to Elspeth. I hadna telled her half the story afore she jaloused the rest. However, to begin again, there's great feasting and rejoicing going on at the Spittal the now, and also a banquet, which the post says is twa dinners in one. Weel, there's a curran Ogilvies among the guests, and it was them that egged on her little ladyship to make the daring proposal to the earl. What was the proposal? It was no less than that the twa pipers should be ordered to play The Bonny House of Harley. Dominie, I wonder you can tak it so calm when you ken that's the Ogilvies sang, and that it's aimed at the clan of Campbell." "Pooh," I said, "the Ogilvies and the Campbells used to be mortal enemies, but the feud has been long forgotten." "Ay, I've heard tell," Waster Lunny said sceptically, "that the Harley and the Argyle shakes hands now like Christians, but I'm thinking that's just afore the Queen. Dinna speak now, for I'm in the thicket. Her little ladyship was all hinging in gold and jewels, the which winna be her ain till the morn, and she leans ower to the earl and whispers to him to get the pipers to play The Bonny House. He wasna willing, for says he, there's Ogilvies at the table, and ane of the pipers is a Campbell, and we'll better let sleeping dogs lie. However, the Ogilvies launched at his caution, and he was so infatuated with her little ladyship that he gae in and he cried out to the pipers to strike up The Bonny House." Waster Lunny pulled his chair nearer me and rested his hand on my knees. "Dominie," he said in a voice that fell now and again into a whisper, "them looking on swears that when Lauchlan Campbell heard these monstrous orders, his face became ugly and black, so that they kent in a jiffy what he would do. It's said a body jumped back frae him in sudden dread, except poor Angus, the other piper, what was busy tuning up for The Bonny House. Well, Angus had got no further in the tune than the first skirl when Lauchlan looped at him and ripped up the startled critter's pipes with his dirk. The pipes gae a roar of agony like a stuck swine and fell gasping on the floor. What happened next was that Lauchlan, with his dirk handy for anybody that might try to stop him, marched once round the table, playing The Campbells are coming, and then stalked out of the Spittal, his chest far afore him, and his head so weel back that he could see what was going on ahint. Frae the Spittal to here he never stopped that fearsome tune, and I'se warrant he's blawing away at it at this moment through the streets of Thrums." Waster Lunny was not in his usual spirits, or he would have repeated his story before he left me, for he had usually as much difficulty in coming to an end as in finding a beginning. The drought was to him as serious matter as death in the house, and as little to be forgotten for a lengthened period. "There's to be a prayer meeting for rain in the Auld Licht Kirk the night," he told me as I escorted him as far as my side of the Quharity, now almost a dead stream, pitiable to see. "And I'm gaen, though I'm sweer to leave thae poor cattle o' mine. You should see how they look at me when I gie them mair o' that rotten grass to eat. It's enough to make a man greet, for what right hae I to keep kye when I cannot meet them?" Waster Lunny has said to me more than once that the great surprise of his life was when Elspeth was willing to take him. Many a time, however, I have seen that in him which might have made any weaver's daughter proud of such a man, and I saw it again when we came to the riverside. "I'm no ane o' thae farmers," he said truthfully. "That's aye girding at the weather. And Elspeth and me kens that we hae been dealt with bountifully since we took this farm with gay anxious hearts. That woman, Dominie, is enough to put a brave face on a coward, and it's no longer a sign than yestreen when I was sitting in the dumps looking at the aurora borealis, which I canna but regard as a messenger of woe, that she put her hand on my shoulder and she says, Waster Lunny, 20 years syne we began life together with nothing but the claes on our back, and an it please God we can begin it again, for I hae you and you hae me, and I'm no cast down if you're no. Dominie, is there mony sic a women in the world as that?" "Many a one," I said. "Ay, man, it's shame to me, for I hae a kind o' delight in angering Elspeth, just to see what she'll say. I could hae ta'en her on my knee at that minute, but the bairns was there, and so it wouldna hae done. But I cheered her up, for, after all, the drought canna put us so far back as we was 20 years syne, unless it's true what my father said, that the aurora borealis is the devil's rainbow. I saw it 6 times in July month, and it made me shut my een. You was out admiring it, Dominie, but I can never forget that it was seen in the year 12, just afore the great storm. I was only a laddie then, but I mind how that awful wind stripped a' the standing corn in the glen in less time than we've been here at the water's edge. It was called the Deil's Besom. My father's hindmost words to me was, 'It's time enough to greet, laddie, when you see the aurora borealis.' I mind he was so complete ruined in an hour that he had to apply for relief frae the poor's rate. Think o' that, and him a proud man. He would take nothing till one winter day when we was a starving, and syne I gaed with him to speir for't, and he telled me to grip his hand ticht, so that the caudness o' mine micht gie him courage. They were doing out the charity in the town's house, and I had never been in it afore. I canna look at it now without thinking of that day when me and me father gaed up the stair together. Mr. Duthie was presiding at the time, and he wasna muckle older than Mr. Dishart is now. I mind he speired for proof that we was needing, and my father couldna speak. He just pointed at me. 'But you have a good coat on your back yoursel',' Mr. Duthie said, for there were mony out waiting, sair needing. 'It was lended him to come here,' I cried, and without a word my father opened the coat, and I saw he had nothing on aneath, and his skin blue with cauld. Dominie, Mr. Duthie handed him 1 shilling and 6pence, and my father's fingers closed greedily on it for a minute, and syne it fell to the ground. They put it back in his hand, and it slipped out again, and Mr. Duthie gave it back to him, saying, 'Are you so cold as that?' But oh man, it wasna cauld that did it, but shame of being on our rates. The blood ran through my father's head, and syne left it as quick, and he flung down the siller and walked out of the town house with me running after him. We warsled through that winter, God kens how, and it's near a pleasure to me think o' it now, for rain or no rain I can never be reduced to sic straits again." The farmer crossed the water without using the stilts which were no longer necessary, and I little thought, as I returned to the schoolhouse, what terrible things were to happen before he could offer me his snuff mull again. Serious as his talk had been, it was neither of drought nor of the incident at the Spittal that I sat down to think. My anxiety about Gavin came back to me until I was like a man imprisoned between walls of his own building. It may be that my presentiments of the afternoon looked gloomier now than they were, because I cannot return to them save over a night of agony, black enough to darken any time connected with it. Perhaps my spirits only fell as the wind rose, for wind ever takes me back to Harvie, and when I think of Harvie my thoughts are of the saddest. I know that I sat for some hours, now seeing Gavin pay the penalty of marrying the Egyptian, and again drifting back to my days with Margaret, until the wind took to playing tricks with me, so that I heard Adam Dishart enter our home by the sea every time the schoolhouse door shook. I became used to the illusion after starting several times, and thus when the door did open, about 7 o'clock, it was only the wind rushing to my fire like a shivering dog that made me turn my head. Then I saw the Egyptian staring at me, and though her sudden appearance on my threshold was a strange thing, I forgot it in the whiteness of her face. She was looking at me like one who had asked a question of life or death, and stopped her heart for the reply. "What is it?" I cried, and for a moment I believed I was glad she did not answer. She seemed to have told me already as much as I could bear. "He has not heard," she said aloud in an expressionless voice, and turning would have slipped away without another word. "Is anyone dead?" I asked, seizing her hands and letting them fall, they were so clammy. She nodded, and trying to speak could not. "He is dead," she said at last in a whisper. "Mr. Dishart is dead," and she sat down quietly. At that I covered my face, crying, "God help Margaret!" And then she rose, saying fiercely, so that I drew back from her, "There is no Margaret. He only cared for me." "She is his mother," I said hoarsely, and then she smiled to me, so that I thought her a harmless, mad thing. "He was killed by a piper called Lauchlan Campbell," she said, looking up at me suddenly. "It was my fault. Poor Margaret," I wailed. "And poor Babbie," she entreated pathetically. "Will no one say poor Babbie?" End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 27. First journey of the Dominie to Thrums during the 24 hours. "How did it happen?" I asked more than once, but the Egyptian was only with me in the body, and she did not hear. I might have been talking to someone a mile away whom a telescope had drawn near my eyes. When I put on my bonnet, however, she knew that I was going to Thrums, and she rose and walked to the door, looking behind to see that I followed. "You must not come," I said harshly, but her hand started to her heart as if I had shot her, and I added quickly, "Come." We were already some distance on our way before I repeated my question. "What matter how it happened?" she answered piteously, and there were words of which I felt the force. But when she said a little later, "I thought you would say it was not true," I took courage and forced her to tell me all she knew. She sobbed while she spoke, if one may also sob without tears. "I heard of it at the Spittal," she said. "The news broke out suddenly there that the piper had quarrelled with someone in Thrums, and that in trying to separate them Mr. Dishart was stabbed. There is no doubt of its truth." "We should have heard of it here," I said hopefully, "before the news reached the Spittal. It cannot be true." "It was brought to the Spittal," she answered, "by the hill road." Then my spirit sank again, for I knew that this was possible. There is a path, steep but short, across the hills between Thrums and the top of the glen, which Mr. Glendinning took frequently when he had to preach at both places on the same Sabbath. It is still called the Minister's Road. "Yet if the earl had believed it, he would have sent someone into Thrums for particulars," I said, grasping at such comfort as I could make. "He does believe it," she answered. "He told me of it himself." You see, the Egyptian was careless of her secret now. But what was that secret to me? An hour ago it would have been much, and already it was not worth listening to. If she had begun to tell me why Lord Rintoul took a gypsy girl into his confidence, I should not have heard her. "I ran quickly," she said. "Even if a messenger was sent, he might be behind me." Was it her words or the tramp of a horse that made us turn our heads at that moment? I know not. But far back in a twist of the road we saw a horseman approaching at such a reckless pace that I thought he was on a runaway. We stopped instinctively and waited for him, and twice he disappeared in hollows of the road, and then was suddenly tearing down upon us. I recognized in him young Mr. McKenzie, a relative of Rintoul, and I stretched out my arms to compel him to draw up. He misunderstood my motive and was raising his whip threateningly when he saw the Egyptian. It is not too much to say that he swayed in the saddle. The horse galloped on, though he had lost hold of the reins. He looked behind until he rounded a corner, and I never saw such amazement mixed with incredulity on a human face. For some minutes I expected to see him coming back, but when he did not, I said wonderingly to the Egyptian, "He knew you." "Did he?" she answered indifferently, and I think we spoke no more until we were in Windyghoul. Soon we were barely conscious of each other's presence. Never since have I walked between the schoolhouse and Thrums in so short a time, nor seen so little on the way. In the Egyptian's eyes, I suppose, was a picture of Gavin lying dead. But if her grief had killed her thinking faculties, mine, that was only less keen because I had been struck down once before, had set all the wheels of my brain in action. For it seemed to me that the hour had come when I must disclose myself to Margaret. I had realized always that if such a necessity did arise, it could only be caused by Gavin's premature death, or by his proving a bad son to her. Some may wonder that I could have looked calmly thus far into the possible, but I reply that the night of Adam Dishart's homecoming had made of me a man whom the future could not surprise again. Though I saw Gavin and his mother happy in our auld licht manse, that did not prevent my considering the contingencies which might leave her without a son. In the schoolhouse I had brooded over them as one may think over moves on a draught board. It may have been idle, but it was done that I might know how to act best for Margaret if anything untoward occurred. The time for such action had come. Gavin's death had struck me hard, but it did not crush me. I was not unprepared. I was going to Margaret now. What did I see as I went quickly along the glen road, with Babbie silent by my side, and I doubt not pods of the broom crackling all around us? I saw myself entering the old licht manse, where Margaret sat weeping over the body of Gavin, and there was none to break my coming to her, for none but she and I knew what had been. I saw my Margaret again, so fragile now, so thin the wrists, her hair turned grey. No nearer could I go, but stopped at the door, grieving for her, and at last saying her name aloud. I saw her raise her face and look upon me for the first time for 18 years. She did not scream at the sight of me, for the body of her son lay between us and bridged the gulf that Adam Dishart had made. I saw myself draw near her reverently and say, "Margaret, he is dead, and that is why I have come back." And I saw her put her arms around my neck as she often did long ago. But it was not to be. Never since that night at Harvie have I spoken to Margaret. The Egyptian and I were to come to Windyghoul before I heard her speak. She was not addressing me. Here Gavin and she had met first, and she was talking of that meeting to herself. "It was there," I heard her say softly, as she gazed at the bush beneath which she had seen him shaking his fist at her on the night of the riots. A little farther on she stopped, where a path from Windyghoul sets off for the well in the wood. She looked up it wistfully, and there I left her behind, and pressed on to the mud house to ask Nanny Webster if the minister was dead. Nanny's gate was swinging in the wind, but her door was shut, and for a moment I stood at it like a coward, afraid to enter and hear the worst. The house was empty. I turned from it relieved, as if I had got a respite, and while I stood in the garden the Egyptian came to me shuddering, her twitching face asking the question that would not leave her lips. "There is no one in the house," I said. "Nanny is perhaps at the well." But the gypsy went inside, and pointing to the fire said, "It has been out for hours. Do you not see? The murder has drawn everyone into Thrums." So I feared. A dreadful night was to pass before I knew that this was the day of the release of Saunders Webster, and that frail Nanny had walked into Tilliedrum to meet him at the prison gate. Babbie sank upon a stool, so weak that I doubt whether she heard me tell her to wait there until my return. I hurried into Thrums, not by the hill, though it is the shorter way, but by the Roods, for I must hear all before I ventured to approach the manse. From Windyghoul to the top of the Roods it is a climb and then a steep descent. The road has no sooner reached its highest point than it begins to fall in the straight line of houses called the Roods, and thus I came upon a full view of the street at once. A cart was labouring up it. There were women sitting on stones at their doors, and girls playing at palaules, and out of the house nearest me came a black figure. My eyes failed me. I was asking so much from them. They made him tall and short, and spare and stout, so that I knew it was Gavin, and yet, looking again, feared. But all the time, I think, I knew it was he. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 28. The Hill Before Darkness Fell, Scene of the Impending Catastrophe. "You're better now?" I heard Gavin ask presently. He thought that having been taken ill suddenly I had waved to him for help because he chanced to be near. With all my wits about me, I might have left him in that belief, for rather would I have deceived him than had him wonder why his welfare seemed so vital to me. But I, who thought the capacity for being taken aback had gone from me, clung to his arm and thanked God audibly that he still lived. He did not tell me then how my agitation puzzled him, but led me kindly to the hill where we could talk without listeners. By the time we reached it I was again wary, and I had told him what had brought me to Thrums, without mentioning how the story of his death reached my ears, or through whom. Mr. Mackenzie, he said, interrupting me, galloped all the way from the Spittal on the same errand. However, no one has been hurt much, except the piper himself. Then he told me of how the rumour arose. You know of the incident at the Spittal, and that Campbell marched off in the high dudgeon. I understand that he spoke to no one between the Spittal and Thrums, but by the time he arrived here he was more communicative, yes, and thirstier. He was treated to drink in several public houses by persons who wanted to hear his story, and by he began to drop hints of knowing something against the Earl's bride. Do you know Rob Dow?" "Yes," I answered, "and what you have done for him." "Ah, sir," he said, sighing, "for a long time I thought I was to be God's instrument in making a better man of Rob, but my power over him went long ago. 10 short months of the ministry takes some of the vanity out of a man." Looking sideways at him, I was startled by the unnatural brightness of his eyes. Unconsciously he had acquired the habit of pressing his teeth together in the pauses of his talk, shutting them on some woe that would proclaim itself, as men do who keep their misery to themselves. "A few hours ago," he went on, "I heard Rob's voice in altercation as I passed the Bull Tavern, and I had a feeling that if I failed with him, so should I fail always throughout my ministry. I walked into the public house and stopped at the door of a room in which Dow and the piper were sitting drinking. I heard Rob saying fiercely, 'If what you say about her is true, Highlandman, she's the woman I've been looking for this half year, and mair, what is she like?' I guessed from what I had been told of the piper that they were speaking of the Earl's bride, but Rob saw me and came to an abrupt stop, saying to his companion, 'Dinna say another word about her afore the minister.' Rob would have come away at once in answer to my appeal, but the piper was drunk and would not be so silenced. 'I'll tell the minister about her too,' he began. 'You dinna ken what you're doing,' Rob roared, and then, as if to save my ears from scandal at any cost, he struck Campbell a heavy blow on the mouth. I tried to intercept the blow, with the result that I fell, and then someone ran out of the tavern crying, 'He's killed.' The piper had been stunned, but the story went abroad that he had stabbed me for interfering with him. That is really all. Nothing, as you know, can overtake an untruth if it has a minute's start. Where is Campbell now?" "Sleeping off the effect of the blow. But Dow has fled. He was terrified at the shouts of murder, and ran off up the West Town end. The doctor's dog cart was standing at a door there, and Rob jumped into it and drove off. They did not chase him far, because he is sure to hear the truth soon, and then doubtless he will come back. Though in a few hours we were to wonder at our denseness. Neither Gavin nor I saw why Dow had struck the Highlander down rather than let him tell his story in the minister's presence. One moment's suspicion would have it lit our way to the whole truth. But of the spring to all Rob's behaviour in the past 8 months we were ignorant, and so to Gavin the Bull had only been the scene of a drunken brawl, while I forgot to think in the joy of finding him alive. "I have a prayer meeting for rain presently," Gavin said, breaking a picture that had just appeared unpleasantly before me, of Babbie still in agony at Nanny's. "But before I leave you, tell me why this rumour caused you such distress." The question troubled me, and I tried to avoid it. Crossing the hill, we had by this time drawn near a hollow called the Toad's Hole, then gay and noisy with a caravan of gypsies. They were those same wild Lindsays for whom Gavin had searched Caddam one eventful night, and as I saw them crowding round their king, a man well known to me, I guessed what they were at. "Mr. Dishart," I said abruptly, "would you like to see a gypsy marriage? One is taking place there just now. That big fellow is the king, and he is about to marry 2 of his people over the tongs. The ceremony will not detain us 5 minutes, though the rejoicings will go on all night. I have been present at more than one gypsy wedding in my time, and at the wild, weird orgies that followed them, but what is interesting to such as I may not be for a minister's eyes," and, frowning at my proposal, Gavin turned his back upon the Toad's Hole. Then, as we recrossed the hill to get away from the din of the camp, I pointed out to him that the report of his death had brought Mackenzie to Thrums as well as me. "As soon as Mackenzie heard I was not dead," he answered, "he galloped off to the Spittal without even seeing me. I suppose he posted back to be in time for the night's rejoicing there. So you see it was not solicitude for me that brought him. He came because a servant at the Spittal was supposed to have done the deed." "Well, Mr. Dishart," I had to say, "why should I deny that I have a warm regard for you? You have done brave work in our town." "It has been little," he replied. "With God's help it will be more in the future." He meant that he had given time to his sad love affair that he owed to his people. Of seeing Babbie again, I saw that he had given up hope. Instead of repining, he was devoting his whole soul to God's work. I was proud of him, and yet I grieved, for I could not think that God wanted him to bury his youth so soon. I had thought, he confessed to me, that you were one of those who did not like my preaching. You were mistaken, I said gravely. I dared not tell him that, except his mother. None would have sat under him so eagerly as I. Nevertheless, he said, you were a member of the Auld Licht church in Mr. Caffrey's time, and you left it when I came. I heard your first sermon, I said. Ah, he replied, I had not been long in Thrums before I discovered that if I took tea with any of my congregation and declined a second cup, they thought it a reflection on their brewing. You must not look upon my absence in that light, was all I could say. There are reasons why I cannot come. He did not press me further, thinking I meant that the distance was too great, though frailer folk than I walked 20 miles to hear him. We might have parted thus had we not wandered by chance to the very spot where I had met him and Babbie. There is a seat there now for those who lose their breath on the climb up, and so I have 2 reasons nowadays for not passing the place by. We read each other's thoughts, and Gavin said calmly, I have not seen her since that night. She disappeared as into a grave. How could I answer when I knew that Babbie was dying for want of him not half a mile away? You seemed to understand everything that night, he went on, or if you did not, your thoughts were very generous to me. In my sorrow for him, I did not notice that we were moving on again, this time in the direction of Windyghoul. She was only a gypsy girl, he said abruptly, and I nodded. But I hoped, he continued, that she would be my wife. I understood that, I said. There was nothing monstrous to you? He asked, looking me in the face, in a minister's marrying a gypsy? I own that if I had loved a girl, however far below or above me in degree, I would have married her had she been willing to take me. But to Gavin I only answered, these are matters a man must decide for himself. I had decided for myself, he said emphatically. Yet, I said, wanting him to talk to me of Margaret, in such a case one might have others to consider besides himself. A man's marriage, he answered, is his own affair. I would have brooked no interference from my congregation. I thought, there is some obstinacy left in him still. But aloud I said, it was of your mother I was thinking. Oh, she would have taken Babbie to her heart, he said with the fond conviction of a lover. I doubted it, but I only asked, your mother knows nothing of her? Nothing, he rejoined. It would be cruelty to tell my mother of her now that she is gone. Gavin's calmness had left him, and he was striding quickly nearer to Windyghoul. I was in dread lest he should see the Egyptian at Nanny's door, yet to have turned him in another direction might have roused his suspicions. When we were within 100 yards of the mud house, I knew that there was no Babbie in sight. We halved the distance, and then I saw her at the open window. Gavin's eyes were on the ground, but she saw him. I held my breath, fearing that she would run out to him. You have never seen her since that night? Gavin asked me, without hope in his voice. Had he been less hopeless, he would have wondered why I did not reply immediately. I was looking covertly at the mud house, of which we were now within a few yards. Babbie's face had gone from the window, and the door remained shut. That she could hear every word we uttered now, I could not doubt. But she was hiding from the man for whom her soul longed. She was sacrificing herself for him. Never, I answered, notwithstanding my pity of the brave girl. And then, while I was shaking lest he should go in to visit Nanny, I heard the echo of the Auld Licht bell. That calls me to the meeting for rain, Gavin said, bidding me good night. I had acted for Margaret, and yet I had hardly the effrontery to take his hand. I suppose he saw sympathy in my face, for suddenly the cry broke from him. If I could only know that nothing evil had befallen her. Babbie heard him and could not restrain a heartbreaking sob. What was that? He said, starting. A moment I waited, to let her show herself if she chose, but the mud house was silent again. It was some boy in the wood, I answered. Goodbye, he said, trying to smile. Had I let him go, here would have been the end of his love story, but that piteous smile unmanned me, and I could not keep the words back. She is in Nanny's house, I cried. In another moment these two were together, for weal or woe, and I had set off dizzily for the schoolhouse, feeling now that I had been false to Margaret, and again exulting in what I had done. By and by the bell stopped, and Gavin and Babbie regarded it as little as I heeded the burns now crossing the glen road noisily at places that had been dry 2 hours before. Chapter 29.